Picture this scenario in your mind. You find yourself engaged in dialogue with someone you've regarded as a close companion for many years. You've consistently been present during their challenging periods. You've listened to their concerns late into the night. You've offered guidance, encouragement, and emotional support. Yet when your moment of need arrives, what follows is complete silence. Read messages that receive no reply, phone calls that go straight to voicemail, and suddenly, this individual vanishes from your existence as though they never played any role in it. The hurt runs deep, accompanied by feelings of betrayal, of being exploited, of holding no value when you're no longer providing something useful. Eventually, a moment comes when you make a decision. Enough is enough. You sever communication, block their access, remove their presence, create distance, and then the world around you passes judgment. Oh, what a cold individual, how self-centered. How could you do this to someone who cares about you? Yet nobody asks what brought you to this breaking point. What if I told you that for numerous individuals, disconnecting from everyone isn't an act of heartlessness, but rather a desperate cry from the soul attempting to preserve itself? Welcome to this discussion. Today we're going to explore deeply the psychology behind those who choose to distance themselves from everyone, those who one day decide they'd rather embrace solitude than risk another disappointment. We'll examine this through the perspective of Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers regarding the human mind, who understood like few others the complexity underlying our most painful decisions. Because fundamentally, those who sever connections aren't necessarily running away from others. Often, they're finally attempting to run toward themselves. I've experienced this personally. I've been the companion who gave everything and received mere crumbs. I've felt invisible precisely when I most needed to be noticed. Perhaps you've experienced this too, or perhaps you're on the opposite side, having been distanced by someone without understanding why. Either way, this discussion aims to create understanding, not criticism, because the human psyche runs far deeper than surface appearances suggest. Now let's begin to understand what truly occurs within someone who reaches the point of cutting everyone out. Most individuals who make this drastic decision don't wake up one morning randomly thinking, "I'll be emotionally cold and exclude everyone." No, typically it's the outcome of years following a painful and repetitive pattern. For an extended period, they were the ones holding things together for others, the ones responding at 3 a.m. when someone faced a crisis, the ones organizing, mediating, forgiving, understanding, absorbing other people's emotional burdens without ever demanding anything in return. They served as a safe harbor for many people. But when their own life fell apart, when they lost employment, a relationship, a loved one, or simply went through a period of profound exhaustion, where were these people? Often they disappeared, some with excuses, others without even that. What remains is an open wound. I contributed so much, and when I needed support, I wasn't worth the minimal effort of a message. Jung spoke about the principle of psychological balance. The human mind seeks homeostasis, a state of internal harmony. When we invest emotionally in an asymmetrical manner for years on end, we create enormous imbalance. The soul begins demanding internal justice, and cutting contact, however extreme it may seem, emerges as a desperate attempt to restore that equilibrium. It's as if the unconscious declares, "If nobody will protect me, I'll protect myself." This isn't about becoming the antagonist in someone's story. It's about surviving a cycle of abandonment disguised as friendship. This is where things become even more profound, because this choice to withdraw almost always comes accompanied by tremendous guilt, by an internal voice that accuses. But is it truly selfishness to want to protect what little energy remains? Let's continue this reflection in the next section, where I'll show you how all this connects with the social mask that Carl Jung called the persona, and how when it breaks, we often prefer cutting everything off, rather than facing the fear of being rejected again for simply being human. If you feel exhausted from wearing this mask, write MASK in the comments. Stay with me, because this is only beginning. What happens when this wound accumulates over years? The individual begins carrying an increasingly heavy mask. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, that version of ourselves we present to the world to be accepted, loved, needed. It's the part that smiles even when exhausted, that says, "I'm here for you," even when nobody ever asked, "And you, how are you doing?" Many people who end up severing ties spent their entire lives perfecting a persona of savior, of perfect listener, of unconditional friend, of someone who never demands, never complains, never places their own boundaries first. This persona gets constructed from early on, perhaps because during childhood they learned they only received attention when being useful, or because they saw that complaining brought rejection, or simply because they have enormous hearts and believe true love means giving without limits. The problem is, the persona isn't the real self, it's an adaptation. And the more you live solely through the persona, the more you suffocate what Jung called the self, the deep center of the psyche, the totality of who you truly are, complete with needs, anger, exhaustion, selfish desires. Yes, selfish in the healthy sense of the word. When these individuals finally break, when they realize they've given years of emotional energy and during their own pain found themselves alone, the persona begins to crack. Then comes the panic. Because if I remove this mask of perfect friend, if I start saying no, if I begin prioritizing my peace, will anyone remain? Am I lovable when I'm not being useful? Do I deserve space even when I'm not helping anyone? This fear of rejection is ancient. Jung said the psyche carries archetypal memories of abandonment, the primal fear of being expelled from the tribe and dying alone in the wilderness. So to avoid this unbearable pain of being left behind for being imperfect, the person makes a radical decision. They distance themselves first. They cut contact. They control the narrative. It's as if the unconscious declares, if I leave now, at least I won't be abandoned again. At least the pain will be chosen by me and not imposed. It's an illusion of control, yes, but for a psyche wounded repeatedly, this illusion is what separates total collapse from survival. The most painful part is that often those who do this carry immense guilt, because the persona is still there whispering, "You're being ungrateful, you're hurting people who care about you, you're becoming someone bad." But the truth is, deep down, this person isn't rejecting others out of malice. They're rejecting the false version of themselves that they can no longer sustain. It's a moment of profound crisis in the soul's journey. Jung would say it's the instant when the persona begins to dissolve. And this is frightening, because without the mask, we feel naked before the world. But it's also the instant when something greater can begin to emerge. In the next section, we'll talk precisely about this mechanism of abandoning before being abandoned, how it functions as a primitive defense of the psyche, and why, even though it appears cold on the outside, it almost always conceals a much greater pain within. Take a deep breath and continue with me, because now we're going to delve even deeper into this emotional mechanism that few people truly understand. It's exactly at this point that the psyche activates one of the oldest and most primitive defense mechanisms that exist, control of the narrative through preventive abandonment. Think about this. Being abandoned hurts in an almost unbearable way because it places us in a position of total passivity. You don't choose, don't anticipate, don't prepare. One day the person simply vanishes or changes or decides you're no longer a priority. You're left with the sensation that you weren't enough, that you could have done something different, that you were evaluated and deemed disposable. This pain has a name in psychology. It's the pain of unpredictable rejection, and it activates the same brain regions as intense physical pain. The mind registers this as a genuine threat to survival. So what does the psyche do to protect itself? It creates a strategy. If I'm the one who leaves first, I control when the pain happens. I choose the moment. I decide the narrative. It's no longer about being discarded. It's about making a choice. It's an illusion, certainly, but a powerful one. Because in that moment, the person recovering fragments of agency. They're no longer the victim awaiting the next blow. They become the author of their own exit. And yes, this often appears cruel to those on the outside. People wonder, how can someone be so cold? How can they simply disappear? But what they don't see is that this coldness is actually frozen pain. It's a protective layer the psyche builds because the alternative, remaining vulnerable to repeated abandonment, feels like psychological death. Jung understood this profoundly. He knew the unconscious doesn't operate through moral judgments. It operates through survival. And when survival seems to demand isolation, the psyche will choose isolation. Not because it wants to, but because all other options have already proven too painful. This brings us to something fundamental. The person cutting ties isn't doing it because they don't care. They're doing it because they cared too much, and it nearly destroyed them. They loved with such intensity, gave with such generosity, opened themselves with such vulnerability, that when they realized this wasn't reciprocated, the wound became too deep to continue bearing. So they retreat, not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation, not to punish others, but to stop punishing themselves for not being enough. And here's where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial, because in withdrawing, the person often confronts parts of themselves they've rejected their whole life. The part that feels anger, the part that wants to be selfish, the part that's tired of being good, the part that screams, "I deserve more than this." These are shadow aspects, pieces of the self that were pushed into darkness because they didn't fit the persona of the perfect friend, the endless giver, the person who never complains. But when you cut everyone out and find yourself alone, there's nowhere left to hide from these parts. They emerge. And this can be terrifying or liberating, depending on whether you have courage to face them. Jung said confronting the shadow is one of the most important tasks of becoming whole, because until you accept your capacity for selfishness, your right to anger, your need for boundaries, you'll keep attracting situations that violate these needs. You'll keep giving until depleted. You'll keep accepting less than you deserve. The isolation after cutting ties can become sacred space where this confrontation happens, where the person finally asks, "Who am I when I'm not performing? What do I actually want? What are my real limits? What parts of myself have I been sacrificing to maintain relationships that weren't truly reciprocal?" These aren't comfortable questions. They hurt, but they're necessary. And something interesting occurs. When someone begins engaging with their rejected parts, when they start honoring their shadow instead of suppressing it, they begin transforming from the inside out. They're no longer someone who needs relationships to feel whole, because they're already whole. And paradoxically, it's precisely this person who can return to authentic connection, without masks, without fear of abandonment, because the fear of being alone has lost its power. In the next section, we'll close this reflection by examining both sides of the story. Because those who cut ties aren't the only ones suffering. Those who get cut also carry a profound wound. And Jung teaches us that to understand the other, we often must first understand the rejected part within ourselves. Here we arrive at the point where understanding needs to open toward both sides of the bridge that was broken. Because until now we've spoken primarily about those who cut, who reach their limit, who protect themselves, who dive into solitude, trying to find themselves. But there's the other side of the story, those who get cut, who wake up one day discovering that someone they considered important simply disappeared, without clear explanation, without final argument, without chance for dialogue. And the question that keeps pounding is, what did I do wrong? Why wasn't I worth a single conversation? This pain is also real, and it runs deep. Those who are distanced often relive the same ancient wound of abandonment, perhaps from childhood, perhaps from past relationships, and interpret the cut as proof they're not enough, not lovable, don't deserve to stay. The mind begins doing what the mind does when wounded, filling the silence with painful narratives. I must have been annoying. I must have demanded too much. I must have been selfish without realizing. And then self-esteem crumbles. Trust in others shakes even further, and the fear of getting close to someone new grows. Jung would tell us that at this moment, the psyche of those who are cut is being confronted with their own shadow too, but from a different angle. The shadow here might be the part the person doesn't want to see in themselves. Perhaps the part that, without realizing, got accustomed to receiving without giving in equal measure. Perhaps the part that fled when the other needed them. Perhaps the part that, out of fear of conflict, never asked. Quote 7. Perhaps the part that idealized the relationship and ignored signs of imbalance. I'm not saying those who get cut are always at fault, not at all. Often the cut happens precisely because the person who distanced themselves could no longer express their needs without feeling judged or rejected. But what Jung invites us to do is stop asking only why did they do this to me, and start asking also, what part of me is being touched by this rejection? What ancient wound is bleeding now? What aspect of myself haven't I yet accepted? And am I projecting onto the other as their fault? True empathy doesn't mean agreeing with the other's behavior. It means recognizing that both sides are suffering, and both sides are somehow trying to protect something sacred within themselves. Those who cut are protecting their own sanity after years of exhaustion. Those who are cut are protecting their own dignity after feeling disposable. Both are in pain, both are trying to survive, and both are often trapped in the same illusion, that the other is responsible for internal peace. Jung said individuation is never solely individual. It happens in relationships, even those that end. Because each ending, each cut, each rejection is a mirror that forces us to look at what we haven't yet integrated. If we can look without blaming the other, and without blaming ourselves entirely, the possibility of mutual healing emerges. Not necessarily reconciliation, that's not always possible or healthy, but understanding, acceptance that the human psyche is complex, contradictory, wounded, and that nobody is the absolute villain in someone else's story. So, if you're on the side of those who cut, allow yourself to feel guilt without drowning in it. Ask what this guilt is protecting. Ask what your solitude is requesting you to examine. If you're on the side of those who were cut, allow yourself to feel pain without transforming it into eternal hatred. Ask what this rejection is revealing about your own parts that still need acceptance. In the next and final section, we'll close this reflection with what Jung considered the great objective of this entire journey: the possibility of becoming whole, and from there, building relationships that no longer depend on masks, on performance, or on fear of abandonment. Because the cut doesn't need to be the end. It can be the beginning of something far more genuine. Stay with me until the finish. We're reaching the point where pain begins transforming into meaning, and where hope stops being just a beautiful word and becomes a real possibility. We finally arrive at the heart of all this, the path of individuation, the great objective that Carl Jung saw as the deepest meaning of human life. Individuation isn't becoming perfect, isn't becoming better than others, nor more spiritual, nor more productive. It's becoming whole. It's integrating the luminous persona with the dark shadow, the desire for connection with the need for solitude, the capacity to give with the sacred right to receive, and to say no when necessary. Those who go through the process we've described, the exhaustion, the radical cut, the dive into solitude, the confrontation with the shadow, are often unknowingly in the middle of this alchemical journey. The cut isn't the end of the story, it can be the turning point. Because when the person emerges from silence, no longer dependent on external approval, no longer hostage to fear of abandonment, something changes forever. They stop attracting asymmetrical relationships because they stop offering unlimited energy without clear boundaries. They stop fearing solitude because they've learned to truly keep themselves company. They stop projecting onto others the responsibility for their own peace, because they've found within themselves a center that doesn't easily crumble. And paradoxically, it's precisely this whole person, imperfect, conscious of their own limits and their own shadows, who becomes capable of deeper and more genuine relationships. Not relationships based on emotional performance, on masks, on fear of loss. Relationships based on conscious choice, on real presence, on mutual respect. Jung said the encounter with the self transforms everything, and he's right. Because when you encounter yourself, the other stops being a desperate necessity and becomes a beautiful possibility. So, if you recognize yourself in this story, whether as someone who cut, as someone who was cut, or as someone in the middle of silence right now, know this: your pain isn't in vain. It's raw material for something greater. It's your psyche's invitation to grow, to integrate, to become who you truly are. Don't rush, don't blame yourself excessively, don't force reconciliations that aren't authentic. Simply ask with gentleness every day. Quote 9. The answer comes slowly, but it comes. And when it arrives, you'll realize that cutting ties didn't destroy you. It freed you for something more genuine, with yourself, and eventually with others. Thank you for staying with me until here. This topic is heavy, but it's also liberating. You're not alone. The human psyche is complex, but it's also incredibly resilient, and you deserve peace. A peace that comes from within, that nobody can take away. If you choose your own peace, write my peace in the comments.